Hello and welcome back to JLXP. Mark's here, representing the current state of NA fandom, and he's not going to contribute to the podcast. He's just going to be in the shot for 40 minutes
I'll
and
just
give reactions.
groan. I'll groan when you make points about North America. That's about all we can do.
Yeah. So what we're going to do on this episode, more realistically, is we're going to discuss a little bit of each of the groups that we saw, but not go super in depth because we were talking before this, and we both kind of had the feeling that the last 3 days of groups were a little bit of a letdown in terms of drama and storyline. It was like we played 5 games or so to get to the first or second place tiebreaker, and the differences between, like, Group B, for instance, has JDG and Damwon at 5-1, and then EG and G2 at 1-5. Group D is the same. Group C, even though it had a lot of potential for a crazy 3-way tie at 4-2, very early on in the day, that became impossible because Top Esports lost that epic base race game to GAM. So, overall mood right now for you, Mark, would you say?
After the 0-10 or 0-9 first week, I think overall mood has gone up a little bit because we've at least beaten Europe and kind of dragged them down to our level for week 2.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's really not as much to be excited for. I do think, so the group draw bracket draw just finished.
Yeah, we're
and
at
that was
7:15 PST, just saw the quarterfinal draw for the rest of Worlds.
Yep. So it's actually not that bad of a draw. So I think that's actually giving me a little bit of life right now. There's a huge opportunity for team kill. There's only 1 through quarters. So on that sense, hey, that's pretty good. Quarters will actually be probably enjoyable. But yeah, there was the stat going around on Reddit right now about how teams that didn't make quarters were 3-29 against teams that did make quarters.
And we just checked that before this podcast on to 2021 because it's always going to be some very large number of losses to a small number of wins. But even in 2021, there was 7 or 8 wins from teams that didn't make it to quarterfinals in group stage. Like TL had a bunch of wins. The Cloud9 group was really competitive last year, and basically just a much more competitive groups last year. So the stat is not super fraudulent.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that even a single win or 2 at the right time can make it feel very good. So the fact that Fnatic did take a win in week 1 over T1 and was 2-1, that made it feel kind of close. But yeah, that was 2 of the groups were straight up dead. Group B and Group D were basically dead the entire time.
Very early on.
Yeah, and 2 of the wins did come from TES as well, who didn't make it, who are legitimately, I think you can make the case, worthy of being in quarterfinals. Not that they deserve it over Rogue, because Rogue did go 3-0 week 1, but that's a legitimately good team, giving 2 of the 3 wins, and then the rest just didn't come from anywhere.
Yeah, I'll start with Group C actually. So Group C has basically the identical structure of the TL group in 2020 that was Suning, G2, TL, and Machi, with GAM Esports being your Machi analog and Top being your TL analog, where the top 3 teams all 1-1 each other. So it feels very competitive and all 3 teams are bad, but the actual group decider is which team failed to 2-0 the weak team.
Yeah.
Which was in 2020, it was us. It was TL. We lost our first game to Machi, and here it was Top getting a few auto attacks on the Nexus, which is extra tragic if you saw the Vandral stuff.
I was about to bring that up.
Procking. Holy crap.
That is it's too late to remake that group, but if he found that...
Yeah. And just for people that didn't keep up with Reddit or Twitter, basically at the very end of the GAM versus Top game, Levi respawns as Karthus, ults, kills 3 people, including the Lucian, who had a Maw, which was up and didn't proc, and would have left him with 500 health.
Yeah, I think it did go on cooldown, but there was no shield that was seen on him, and his health bar went down.
Yeah.
And then he died right afterwards to set, and people are saying if he had that 500 health,
then maybe he gets the 2 autos on the next.
Maybe he gets it. Yeah,
it's hard to say, and I'm sure at this point nothing will be done because you're not going to go back. I'm sure some of these teams have already flown home and stuff, but that is bad. That is so rough.
That feels really bad. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's always like over the course of worlds, there's probably a bunch of like little bugs that crop up and you don't
Yeah,
notice.
probably.
Like I like no one caught this until Vanderbilt caught it like a day and a half later or however
Hmm.
long it's been, now like
Hmm.
24 hours or so. It makes you wonder like how many of these instances go through in team fights that people just like don't catch. Because I saw people being like, "Why didn't Jackie Love pause the game?" And it's like, bro, you are like tunnel visioned. You are
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you can't keep track of all the little variables that are in League of Legends at that point. So like I don't blame the players for not pausing there, and it's just like unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the flame you would receive? And this is a bit of a tangent. Like, as you don't kill the Nexus by 2 hits, and the other team's about to end the game, and you're like, pause. My mod did not proc properly. Please chrono break. Like you just, yeah, I can't see someone in the situation even realizing that, let alone actually like pausing the game. So it would have
If you
been.
ever the takeaway is if you ever lose a base defense, just pause and say something bugged, and just force them to check everything in the game to see if something bugged, and then
Oh,
remake if you failed.
that would actually be such a nightmare. Anyway, so that group does speak to the importance of week one and how like really everything does matter so much. Like there's one argument, like I kind of thought going into the day based on the other European teams going 0-6 that Rogue was going to probably win the game against GAM, but then probably lose to DRX and top, and we'd have a three-way tiebreaker. That was what I was expecting going into the day, and that's very close to what happened. Rogue had no power in avoiding that, so they're definitely backing their way into the quarterfinals more than any other team. And if you think about their whole run, it shows how critical that first top esports game was, where they were kind of losing the game, got those picks top lane, and just like flipped the Baron with Callista. Just the super decisive Baron flip in week one that worked. They win the game off of it. Though, like that is actually to me the moment that got them through to quarterfinals. It's the only Western team through.
Yeah, and like Worlds is interesting because on the one hand, you want little moments and upsets in these things to like matter and
Yeah,
feel really cool. But at the same time, there's this feeling for TES fans and people who like, like you're just like, oh, that's like the base race bug or like this one minor mistake in
yeah,
week one. And it's one of the things that whenever I push for like expanded bracket or whatever it is, I'm always like, it's not just for EU NA representation, but like for teams like for you guys or for Team Liquid in 2021 as a part of that like massive insane group with everyone at 3-3, like multiple teams can get out or whatever. So it's a bummer that TES is going home, but it is what
here's
it is.
here's a big throwback, and I'm making sure I get the teams correctly. Yeah, funnily enough, base race bugs that are potentially group deciding between EU and China. Do you remember the 2014 OMG versus Fnatic base race?
I don't
I
think
just
so.
thought of this. In 2014, there was this crazy like 70-minute Fnatic versus OMG game where after the game was over, some European fans realized that like Soaz's Rumble alt basically didn't take off the recall home guard boost once you recall, and OMG was able to
Oh,
zoom out of the base for defense, kill Fnatic, and save the game, and then they go through the group 3-3. Fnatic doesn't go through the group of 2-4.
I like vaguely remember that or something. Yeah.
I'm still like kind of barely there, but basically they realized there was a bug because he'd. So what happened is as he was recalling, he took damage, but the damage was too late to interrupt the recall. But then
Yeah.
also that meant he didn't. He should have not gotten the home guard bonus, but he did get the home guard bonus because like the damage didn't register and like the recall code or whatever. But it. So this is my long-winded way of saying the universe balanced itself because that was a bug that disadvantaged the European team and advantaged the Chinese team that got the Chinese team through groups. And theoretically, you flip it here.
You just have to wait 8 years
You
for
just have to
karma to
wait eight
even out.
years. Yeah, and it's just going to be totally, totally even. What the hell,
Oh
man?
boy.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So that's
Let's
what do you want?
I was gonna say, do you want to like keep on the not super depresso NA train and save that till the end? Like when are we doing NA depression?
Let's do it now. Because
Okay.
NA did win 3 games of 15, and I've been you and me haven't talked about this, so I'm actually really interested in the conversation that we end up having. You go first.
Okay, so I put a video out as a blame game, like
Yeah.
right before Worlds was starting, where I basically tried to like lay expectations for North American fans because I feel like what always happens is NA fans think we can be like EU, and realistically, we perform slightly worse than them.
Yep.
And so I tried to set expectations of like what you should, as a North American fan, historically accept as like an average performance and
Yeah.
like what you can hope for. And it was kind of a negative video because we don't typically do well. And then we underperformed even the video where I was trying to like set expectations properly. We were as bad as this year as like Europeans pretend we are every single year, or like the haters pretend we are every single year. You know,
Yeah.
like every single year, people talk about how NA is a wild card region. We're fucking dog shit. And the reality is usually like, no, we're clearly the fourth best region, but we're also quite a bit better than the teams below us.
Yep.
And like that's still kind of true based off play-ins and whatnot,
Yep.
but like this is the worst a major region's ever finished. We technically tied the LMS right before the LMS exploded, and
Yes.
they went 3-15 one year.
Yes.
And like this is as bad as major regions have ever been. It's the worst North America's ever been. It's a fucking disaster. And like I have tried to couch fan expectations, and like you can't couch against this. Like you should be mad as a North American fan, and that's like actually what my blaming is going to be on this week. Is like, yeah, it's okay to be mad when your team's fucking just
When
lay an
literally
egg.
everyone goes 1-5.
Yeah,
Yeah. No one went 0-6.
Pog.
So my copium, my small amount of copium here was that, and it's just like the stupidest thing, but someone is always going to be at the bottom of groups. And the team at the bottom of groups is usually like the weakest region that makes it to groups. And since the top regions just got more teams and the LMS basically got kicked out of groups, that just became NA. Right? You could take literally the exact same strength of NA now, transport it 4 years into the past when the LMS also has 3 teams in. You get 1 or 2 wins off of all of those LMS or Brazil or Japan regions that are there, and the group records look very largely the same. You'll be like 7-11 or 8-10. If you just get if you have actual wildcard regions in the groups, which were just kicked out of groups this year.
Yes and no, because it's true that like positionally you're right, but like I feel like there's a lot of times where even after North America gets eliminated and they're kind of copium games, like 100 Thieves beating EDG last year
Yep.
in groups. You
Yep.
know, like you at least have these games where we beat Eastern teams, LPL,
Yeah. TL
LCK,
beat Genji, LNG, and MAD all once in their group last year.
fucking nothing. We
Yeah.
beat 2 European teams who also went 0-3 that week. And we'll get to Europe, I think, in a moment here. But like, and then we beat GAM, who like realistically we should have 2-0'd,
Yeah.
and we fucking 1-1. Or not GAM, excuse me, Flying Oysters.
Yeah.
And they're decent. I don't want to shit on Flying Oysters too hard, but like our number 2 seed should realistically 2-0 them, and they didn't. So you know it's fair to rag on them, and I think that's where like the anger is very justified for me, where it's like we were not even competitive with these LCK and LPL teams.
Again, just to balance it, I would say 100 Thieves had 2 pretty competitive games against RNG.
Yes,
And
EG somebody did well
had
into Doran.
a very close game against JDG and also a somewhat competitive game against Damwon. I don't feel like Cloud9 ever looked like they were in a winning state against EDG or T1 in any of their 4. But they still ultimately had 4 tries per group and were 0-4, like 0-12 on all of their tries. So they didn't even flip one of the games successfully.
No, and I mean like to that point, like one of those games on one of those Baron flips, like you team fight a little bit better for 100 Thieves and they take a win, and it doesn't matter for the group, but they go 2-4 and it feels a little better, you know? Or maybe they go 3-3 if they 2-0 Flying Oysters. And I guess like what I would say there is like that's kind of what my expectation video setting was about. Like that's about what is normal for NA actually would be, to win some of these games but still knock it out, but like have a win or 2 over Eastern teams. And the copium take is that just because that didn't happen this year doesn't mean NA is always going to underperform this badly. Like EU last year, and we'll get to EU, but they looked terrible last year, and at least like Rogue got out and was beating legitimately top teams in the world during week 1.
Yep. You wanted to do a draft thing on NA as well.
Okay. People always talk too much about draft in my opinion. Like, and
Hmm.
I think it's because it's very easy to backseat and hindsight analysis it. You don't actually have to look at like how matchups were supposed to go. You
Hmm.
just lost the matchup, so you go, of course you suck, and you don't have
Hmm.
to like look at like what was supposed to happen. And this started with C9, but like it was like fudge ego drafting. It was about I kind of talked about my previous blame game, and people were
Yeah.
like, oh well, just pick tanks, like it's fine, like just adapt and pick tanks. And I don't know where the community came up with this idea that picking tanks blind into highly skilled Eastern top laners is at all a good idea. Like you get fucking like tanks are bad at laning.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like, and it got proven in week 2, thank God. And people are nitpicking me a little bit because it's like, oh, it's Gragas instead of Ornn, but it's like Gragas is a better laner than Ornn. You're telling me he should take an Ornn? Because there
Hmm.
was the game where it was Ornn Fiora, or excuse me, Gragas Fiora, and it
Yeah.
went even.
Yeah.
And then the Fiora won for Flandre. But like, if you blind tanks, you're gonna get picked apart. They can
Yeah.
do it with GP, which we saw Zeus do. They can do it with Fiora, which they did time and time again. Jax, like
Sometimes Camille, like they can do a lot of
just
stuff.
fucking slamming Aatrox and you pick a tank into it, you self counter pick and you fall behind like 30 CS. And even in games where you go even, a lot of the times the enemy team is just a better team and they win with this, carry top versus your tank, which happened as well multiple times.
Yeah.
And like my point with all of this is not that like I just want people to play to their play style. That's what I care the most about at Worlds. And that's why it pissed me off so much about C9 because their play style in North America was Fudge playing carry tops.
It was Fudge playing
And
counter picks, I would say. I would say he'd picked to the situation because
yeah,
I think his record on Fiora was actually pretty bad throughout the year. It was like,
throughout the year, yes, but in playoffs, he was 4-0 combined between Fiora, Jax, and Camille,
yeah.
and he was 4-0 on Ken, and most of those were counters into like Aatrox
Yeah.
and stuff.
Because
So like,
they actually got massive draft advantages because he played counters to Aatrox and also played Aatrox. Like he just was the king of top lane in that way. Someday wasn't. Blippa wasn't. Like that's one of the big advantages they had. I agree.
yep, for sure.
Yeah.
And my point is not that he didn't suck ass at Worlds. Fudge did. I mean, I love Fudge, but like he was terrible. Like call a spade a spade. But like there were so many years for so long where NA fans shit on our teams for only playing weak side top and
Mm.
only playing tanks. And they hated it, where it's like, oh, we just never play the meta. We only play safe tank tops or like lose matchups. And like Fudge here plays the meta because this is the meta.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
plays the meta. He plays it worse because we're worse. And then he gets torn apart by the community for doing it when like I've watched for 6 years when our tops don't do this and we get mad at them for not being able to play meta. And I'm like, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, because we're getting gapped and it doesn't really matter what he's picking because C9 is like our bot lane lost sums every fucking lane in week 2.
So one
Like,
thing, this is on the same point. I think I made this point in my last podcast as well of that the Fiora was being a scapegoat for NA losses, but when the first time that 100 Thieves got Giga bot gapped by Ruler, it was like you look up and it was a 40 CSD. And
yeah,
it's always just going to be an additive combination of is the matchup bad? Like, how should the matchup go? Let's say in the Ruler versus FBI example, it was, oh, yeah, this matchup is actually negative 20 CS at 15, like on average. But then also Ruler was 20 CS better. So it
yeah,
makes it 40. So, and I think that's exactly the same logic that can be applied to these tank and carry matchups. Like Fudge picked a carry into a tank and was up 5 CS, but that's because he was just misplaying the lane. And if he had picked a tank into a tank, he would have been down 20. And if he would have picked a tank into a carry, he would have been down 40. Like that's
yeah,
basically how it likely would have gone. And that's also like, for what it's worth, like it's the community saying this. Fudge in an interview was like, oh yeah, it was a skill gap. Like we were just not good enough. And people were like, blah, blah, blah. Like he was just, I think that was the correct take from Fudge. They just weren't good enough.
yeah, for sure. And like the thing about that people always lose track of too is like when you start swapping how your team comp plays, it has knock-on effects.
Mm-hmm.
So like Jensen, I think actually turned a pretty good performance mostly in week 2, but he suffered from spillover from bot lane and from top lane at different points and whatnot. And like Berserker and Sven even in the game they won, lost sums, and the only reason we won is because Razork and Hilly fucking ran that game on J4, just EQing in front of a Trundle and 3 other people, missing the knockup and like feeding a kill. But he was only doing that because our bot lane already lost sums 2v2. It's a losing matchup. We had to self counter pick because Sven can't play engagers, I guess, and had to pick Lulu into Soraka. That's kind of troll.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the next game, we go for a bot dive, and Berserker just plays in front of the creep wave, gets hooked, has to cleanse. Sven gets hooked under turret and dies before the dive even gets in. My point with all this is, like, what do you want to do? Like, how do you fix these problems with draft? Because if you put Fudge on a tank top, then you can't play through that, and your bot lane's getting slammed, and then they just camp mid, which is your only lane that's playing kind of well. You know, like it just falls apart.
Yeah.
Anyways,
quick rundown for me, since I feel like this is fun to do with you. Like, what went wrong with all 3 of the NA teams? Like, for me, Cloud9 was a lot of what I was worried was going to happen going into Worlds, that the playoffs patch was so godlike for them, and then this patch really wasn't. And Sven, who's been playing support for 6 months, wasn't going to be able to match up against these world-class supports on engagers. I thought their team comps ended up being largely bad in every game except the one that they won. The one that they won was actually a good team comp, but it was also a team comp that they can probably only play against Fnatic, because they did tank versus tank top lane, they did enchanter bot lane. That probably gets hard punished against the other teams, so they tried other stuff which they weren't as good with. So it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't against the good teams. That was kind of my opinion of what happened to C9.
Absolutely, from my opinion too, especially that Fnatic game. Like, Fnatic handshook us on most of those things in terms of they banned the Aatrox so that they could go tank versus tank as well. And they picked Victor blind so Jensen could pick Ori into it. Because you like, we could play the control mage matchup even out that way. And then bot lane, again, we're just handshaking enchanters or whatever. I don't think any other team will do that, and you can't guarantee these counter picks in that way and whatnot. I agree, their drafts, I didn't like them. Like, I thought game 2 they should have banned the Aatrox themselves. They leave it up, they first pick it, and Flandre picks Fiora into it and whatnot. But like, the MF didn't look good. The Sejuani Prio didn't look good. There's a lot of problems there. I don't want to say that.
To me, Sejuani looked incredible whenever anyone else played it. So I don't think it was a Sejuani problem. Like, I took some notes on other days where, like, damn, every LPL or LCK Sejuani just fucking carrying the game. That's what it felt like.
And they first pick it.
Yeah, it was just locked. I think Sejuani's going to have a large future in this Worlds. So I think EG is the team I weirdly feel the best about.
The white whale.
Weird. Like, JoJo actually had a pretty bad Worlds. He got picked off a lot. And I think, especially I think it was the first Damwon game, I don't have a perfect memory of this, he just kept dying at bad times.
There was a game where he got picked off like 4 or 5 times before like every Drake fight, and we just lost all prio or something.
Yeah, exactly. They ended up only winning 1 game, but I felt like they were, at least they had the, like, kind of aggression to go for things. But I still don't know what to think of Cowrie. Like, I think he's probably LCS level. I don't think he's as good as Danny was in spring or early summer. So I still think they were kind of having to adjust to that. Overall, they did a pretty good job. And I think, I was actually kind of thinking that might be, this is maybe a dumb statement, the hardest group in World's history. Like, number 1 LPL seed, Damwon, EG, and G2. It's pretty hard. It's hard to get much stronger.
On paper, absolutely.
Yeah.
You're basically taking
this
2.5
is something I'm fine to be wrong with. Like, it just popped into my head. I'd love it if people be like, actually, this would be the strongest group. But I'm like, absolutely, I agree. Like, this isn't a hard and fast take.
I'm sure there's better groups that you could point to over Worlds. I think especially considering G2 did not look like historic G2. It might have made that great
because of the group, or like, that's the debate. Basically.
Yeah, and you people can debate that. I think at the end of the day, it is a tough group. It sucks that I think, you can't even say it sucks that EG was put in there. They're the third seed. Like, this
came from playing. You should have a hard group.
Yeah. I don't really think there's anything you can cope on too hard. Other than, like, they looked okay. It's obvious. Like, I agree about the Cowrie versus Danny take. I think they have very different strengths.
Yeah.
Danny's laning is like mid and can get exploited on the international stage, but he offers you a level of late game pop off potential that is pretty much unmatched in North America, except by Berserker. And I don't think Berserker. I love Berserker, but he didn't look as good this meta either. So
And
Unlucky.
then my 100 Thieves thoughts is they probably had the best chance of making it out, probably because they were in the Flying Oyster group. And I thought their drafts were really good. Like, I thought they had a hard outdraft on RNG both games, but just played too slow. Like, there were multiple, like, so I cast the first game and I listened to Cadro cast the game today of their games against RNG. And, like, to me, they just had superior front to back team fighting and multiple lanes of prio the first time they played RNG. Didn't secure a single Drake, would just lose team fights because they had poor setup for every single Drake. And then today they had the like NA God comp, Senna Seraphine, but just like, I don't know, they were just too slow. Like there were so many moments where if they just made a quick decision, I feel like they could have just won, but they maybe felt too comfortable that Senna Seraphine was going to outscale. It was weird. Like I actually think they could have won both those RNG games with a little bit more aggression, which is super disappointing for me.
Yeah, I think we were talking about Fudge being great in playoffs, but someday it was really good this Worlds, actually, I think.
True,
very competitive.
Yeah.
Abba was a little bit of a struggle. Closer was hit or miss. Bot lane got gapped really hard sometimes.
The
but
ruler
then
games were just over through bot lane. Like Gen G just bot gapped them, as they did all of the LCK as well. So like obviously it was exceptionally noticeable against FBI Huhi, but it was also like they do this to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I will say that the RNG second game, I actually think I understand the thought process that they had, which was that they were kind of burger flipping games on 5v5 team fights at Baron, because they didn't trust their setup enough. Like when you think about a Senna Seraphine comp, and especially since they stacked 3 dragons very quickly, you want extended standoffs around 4th dragon, where they have the pressure of having to stop you from stacking it, and if they contest you, you can back off and heal up, and then restart, and you just kind of like perma pressure around that. And I think they just weren't confident enough in their setups to actually ever do that, because what they started doing was instead flipping Baron when RNG went to control Dragon.
Because RNG had good Dragon setup, like, I guess we should just go Baron. Don't want to check River and die.
Yep. So they weren't able to play, I think, to what their team comp wants to do. But I don't even hate the idea of like, listen, we're a worse team than RNG. Let's force them to run into us and stop our Baron take, and maybe we win a team fight. And like, they got the Baron once, almost died. They got the Baron, I think, a second time and got absolutely wiped. But like, I didn't hate it, you know, for how close that game was.
I didn't hate either of their games. Just disappointed, like, because it was the I don't know. They obviously didn't win any game against a good team. I think that was actually a good way for, especially when I look at the analytics, most people that watch this podcast are NA fans, so going through each group from like an NA lens is actually pretty useful. What about Europe, though?
Okay, so my hot take for Europe, because I hope you're right that no Europeans are watching this.
They will. Like, I'm going to release it right away, so they're going to see it. And if
they're going to wake up,
if they make it to the 28-minute mark, this is toast.
Oh shit! Here's where we shit on them.
All right, what is it?
Hold on, AC bro.
Okay.
So I feel like they got so lucky that Rogue had an early read on the meta and were able to win those games, because of the 1 in 10 or 1 in 9 second week, of course, being a disaster. Like, they are better than North American. I don't want to like make it sound like I'm not saying that, but like this was almost another terrible year like last year for them, with like Rogue barely surviving because TES did not force the 3-way tie at the top of the bracket and kick them out. They might have not made it at 4-2, which feels terrible to your point.
They might have still made it at 4-2 if their wins were, because the way a 3-way tie works is the team with the fastest wins would just precede through. That might have been them, because their wins in week 1 were pretty fast. Yeah,
so it's possible, but either way, like, I think just even watching their games, the gap between Fnatic and the Eastern teams when they were not playing well in week 2 and G2 looked as bad as the gap between NA and it looked the same size. Yeah, they were getting absolutely rolled. Mad Lions looked terrible. People are coping that like, oh well, if XL went, they would have done better, and it's like maybe they would have taken a game off EG. You know, like, I don't know.
I think Mad Lions was like the best possible 4 seed they could have sent. Like,
that's hot take, because I think a lot of people would say XL, but like,
I know.
I don't think. Oh, he knows. All right. Well, here you go. That's your hill to die on. Mine is just that like, Rogue is good, and I don't make sense. I'm not saying Rogue is good, but like, if a couple things broke differently, despite the fact that they are good because the groups are tough, and TES is legitimately like a top 8 team in the world, you know, like they could have still not made quarters. And I think like it's so funny when NA goes 0-9 in week 1, you know, there's Reddit threads everywhere. What a dog shit region, fucking paycheck stealing bum ass, you know, like the Tyler 1 copy pasta. And then they have literally almost the exact same performance. And I wonder if they look at their own region with the same like concern that North America is being looked at, because this is 2 years now where like our gap in performance isn't that big and we both done pretty fucking bad.
Yep. I agree. There's a lot of reasons that the reactions are different. And this is definitely a biased NA viewpoint where I've definitely felt that a lot of times LEC can have very analogous performances to what NA does, but the fan reaction is completely different. And I made kind of podcasts about this, of the way that NA fans should like support their teams when they're struggling. And I actually think largely this year, considering the results, the NA fans were very polite based on their standard. Like there's been far better years that had far more flame than what is actually the worst year NA has ever had. So I think they actually made strides in that way. But the LEC fans, for sure, like I'd also say like even the casters, like Shox she's posting these like stories about, like she memes it really well of, yeah, Rogue sucked, but we still got in quarterfinals and I'm going to fucking celebrate it. Like I actually love that stuff. I think that's the correct response to those things. But I would agree that the LEC had 2 years of very underwhelming results. And since G2 had that amazing, like G2 and Fnatic had those amazing years from 2018 through 2019, and even a little bit of 2020 when G2 made it to semifinals and Fnatic was very close to taking down top esports with the famous Shox monologue. They have looked not good. So
yeah, I mean, like there was a golden era from 2018 to 2020 that we have seemingly moved on from.
Yep.
And
I agree.
Barely clinging to even a semblance of that era.
But honestly, getting one team through does so much. Like just literally having a team to root for one additional week is such a world of difference.
I am so fucking jealous too, to be clear. You know, like to be clear, like I would kill to have that be an NA team that I'm making this point about. Yeah. You know, like I would love to be saying that the NA region is struggling. We're like
100 Thieves made it through. They're not good, but RNG all got COVID. So like, what are you gonna do? Like they're just playing poorly. So 100 Thieves makes it through.
Is it bad to admit that when I saw that update, I was like,
maybe.
Yeah.
A little bad. It's also, no one mentioned it. It's obviously like an awkward thing to talk about. Like, does RNG win that group if they're not sick, right? Like Gen G, too old them today. RNG, I think, looked a lot worse than they would have otherwise. And especially when they had to, they played across a 7-hour stretch from the isolation rooms. Like I feel like they were completely gassed by the final tiebreaker against Gen G. But hopefully they have time to recover. It's just like it's literally part of the game this year.
I mean, it's also just something about Worlds in general is that they play 3 days or 3 games on the final day for you. And if you have a bad day, you have a bad day and you're fucked, which I think is kind of what happened to FPX last year, where it's like, yep, shit day. Yep. Goodbye.
Do you have a minute? Like,
sure.
Yeah. So question, and this is actually like a whole other podcast. Where do you fall on the, and this is going to apply for probably both LEC, but also like the NA fans, like what the hell are these NA pros doing not playing enough Champions Queue? And it's just the work ethic that these guys, like, because you're basically saying NA fans should be mad. This is the worst performance. We've coped a little bit of like going team by team why they did this. But literally every year people have this conversation of why does NA still suck? And everyone's answered it in their own ways. You've done blame games about it. I've talked about it on podcasts. But the conversation literally comes up every single year.
Dude, it's so what are your so funny to watch. It's so funny to watch every community member be like, God damn it, not again. Because I saw Kelsey Moser tweeting and someone was like, well, what are your thoughts? And then she's like, I've done, like, just Google it,
and she
bro.
Just, like,
you know, like,
spit him out again.
And I don't blame, like, the churn rate on fandom is actually higher than I think a lot of us old bloods us boomers give it credit for. So like 25% of your audience, it's like their first or second year. Yeah, they haven't seen our old content, so I feel bad for them. But at the same time, as the content creators, like every fucking year we talk about this. My current feeling and what I want to do this time is I do want to reach out to a couple LPL and LCK contacts and just like pick their brain on what their current practice regimen is and compare it to our own. I know that there's always the like mental health versus burnout versus success versus like you're trying to be the best at something versus a 9-to-5 job versus like tech crunch, which like weirdly always gets inserted into a conversation about sports because it's on computers. You know, like it's a very muddy conversation that I just want to like get some actual data from, because I see this every year in the interviews when the world champion team wins about how much they worked that year and how they're all like dead inside now. And I just want to hear that again before I make my video about like, because I do feel like, and you and I talked about this a lot actually one of the playoff days, about the single best of 5 that NA basically copied from EU for the
scrim blocks.
Daily scrim block. Their daily scrim block. And I think both you and I were like, that's fucking terrible.
Yeah.
And I think it's terrible. And I think our practice sucks. It sounds like.
I'll give a quick insight to the people listening, because this is something that doesn't actually get discussed in that many places. Like the thing that does get discussed a whole bunch is like, how much solo queue do you play? How many total hours are you involved in League of Legends? And how much Champions queue do you play? Which I think, generally speaking, China and Korea do play more. I don't actually think it's as much more as most people think. Like, at least when I was on TL, the majority of the players played a lot every day, right? Like, the majority of their day was League of Legends, and you didn't really have much time for other stuff. It wasn't like they were only working for 4 hours. But, okay, here's where the actual discussion was. So it would have been back in 2019, I think, would have been the year that this changed. So there was a time where people would do 2 or 3 scrim blocks a day of 3 games. So like when you were a coach, you'd probably start at like 11, go to 2, right? And then another block would be like 3 to 6, and another block would be 7 to 10 if you did a third block.
Basically, it was 12 to 3, 4 to 7, and then like 8 to 10, because usually the late block was a little
like
slower.
2 games or something. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, and most of the time you did not do the 8 to 10 block, and that was just solo queue.
Yeah. And then what's happened in the last few years is there's one big block of 5 games that you play against the same team, easier to organize. Maybe you get into a better groove that EU did the year the EU was very successful. Like, this was the 2018 year when Fnatic went to finals. So then NA copied this 12 to 5 scrims. And if you do a second block, it's usually like 7 to 10, where you play like 3 games, which only kind of happens around playoffs when teams are really trying to grind. But the discussion kind of went this way of how freaking long reviews have gotten. And it's so ingrained in many of the players or many of the coaches that like you have to review the game, otherwise you will not improve. But the default between game time is 25 minutes. Like, you can have a 20-minute scrim game and you will still do a 25-minute review. And often that review is like, it's constant. And then you like run back to the fucking computers and play another game. And by the time you get to like game 4 or 5, your mind is literally just mush, because you've just had so many tiny little arguments over all these little things, and you just can't focus. But the counter to this is, I heard, at least when some of the NA teams were boot camping in Korea preseason, like before lock-in, they're still doing the 2 blocks of 3. But like, that stuff is fast. Like, some of those teams are like 10 minutes. Like, game's over, 10 minutes, next game starts. 10 minutes, next game starts. And personally, I would love it if we switched to that again, just to see what kind of results it has. Like, play 3 like shotgun games, like fire through them. Then you can have like a 45-minute conversation afterwards and like an hour break, and then be able to focus for your next set. Because I think something is fundamentally broken with the scrim system, but I also need to do more research, because maybe it's the same for LPL and LCK teams.
That's exactly why I want to pick their brains, because I know there's also been instances where this was the case as well. Like I think in 2014 when Samsung won, the way that they scrimmed was almost exclusively against Samsung White and Samsung Blue, and they would play a
Mm,
5 game set and then just play ass loads of solo queue.
yeah.
But I also think that it's fair to say that like just because something works for some people in some regions doesn't mean that it should be the default for everyone.
Yep. I agree.
And I think people not even in esports can relate to lectures that were like the 4 hour lectures and like how you just start zoning out, or like
Hmm.
4 hour meetings whenever you have like one of those like, guys, you really got to get through all this stuff, and like they're just not productive because
Hmm.
you need breaks. And you know, to your point about like we're breaking down like, should I have autoed this minion here to not freeze instead of freeze, and it's the third hour and we're 40 minutes into a review, and it's like, what are we talking about here? Like no one's gonna remember this shit. You
Yep.
know, like people have a very hard time, players and coaches, like you said,
Letting go
and
as
I was
well.
guilty.
It's really
Yeah,
hard to
just
let
like
go.
being like, this is not productive. Take 5, take a piss, come back, let's play the next game. Forget
Hmm.
it. Because there's emotional investment. There's like a need to be right or wrong. I understand why it is difficult, but I think I don't like our practice system from what I hear about it. And everyone complains about it. Parth, after he retired, he had all these meme tweets, and everyone in the ecosystem's like, haha, yeah, it's terrible, haha.
And
And
TSM
it's
was
like,
like the worst ones. Like they were so
I know,
bad.
I know. Oh my God. Anyways, the point is like, I want to do a little bit more research before I go really hard on it, but
Yeah.
I do think
Yeah.
it is a problem right now.
Okay. Let's be true. Let's be true to the title of this episode: groups recap and
Ah, shit.
quarterfinal preview. Ah, crap. Quarterfinals: JDG, Rogue, amazing draw. T1 RNG, Genji, Damwon, the one bad one, and DRX EDG.
Hmm.
I'm so happy we only have one region versus region best of 5. It's a raw deal for Damwon and Genji. Like if this was actually how Genji got knocked out of Worlds, it would be the most depressing thing. But also, if it's how Damwon gets knocked out, it's also kind of sad. I wanted to see as many LPL LCK cross matchups as possible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like this is almost as good as you could have hoped for, like you said, other than swapping like Rogue and JDG, or Rogue
Yeah,
and Damwon.
I mean it is actually the only thing that could have been better. No, I don't think it could have gotten better actually.
I'd have to look at which groups are on which side to to see if Rogue versus Genji works, because maybe it doesn't, and I'm just saying that. But otherwise,
Yeah,
Rogue
so the
versus
only rule
Gen.
is you can't a team in your own group you can't meet until finals. That's the only
Yeah,
restriction. So
yeah.
Genji was
Well,
in.
JDG and yeah, JDG played Damwon already, so that wouldn't work. Yep.
Yeah.
So
So, but
maybe this is the
JDG,
best.
yeah, JDG could only play against Rogue, RNG, or EDG because they're the 2 seeds. So that was
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
was the only way JDG wasn't gonna region kill an LPL team, which is great.
Yeah, I think there had to be one region kill no matter what. Looking at this, and there could have been more. So I think this is
Yeah.
the minimum amount of non-region kills. Um, I think DRX versus Damwon, to your point about like if Genji lose here or if whatever,
Hmm.
DRX versus Damwon maybe would be a less painful region kill by like a shred.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, like Zeka versus Showmaker would have been sick. Zeka versus Scout's still sick. I don't care.
Yeah.
Uh,
Zeka's been
um,
playing so well. It's super cool.
yeah, he's been a beast. JDG Rogue. I don't have a ton to say about it, honestly.
I
I
mean,
feel like
Rogue just
Rogue.
needs to like if JDG underestimates them, which I don't think they will. I think they're gonna probably show up. It's just really hard for Rogue to win. Like their bot lane is definitely their strength, right? If they can get good drafts where they're pushing bot and they can do crazy ganks, they have a chance of pulling an upset. But that's like an 80-20.
JDG's bot lane has been a little sus at points.
Yeah.
JDG has had games where it felt super close, and then they just win some insane team fight and then win the game.
Which is attackable, right? Like that was like uh in NA at least, EG and 100 Thieves going into playoffs for that kind of team. And we
Yeah.
ended up having Cloud9 win it all. Like that doesn't necessarily port super reliably to best of fives.
No, I think there's a very likely chance that Rogue takes a game where they play a lot of team fighting drafts. Their bot lane booms JDG's bot lane,
Yeah.
and then they're able to win from there. I just don't think it'll happen 3 times, but I don't think it's unlikely or impossible that they win a game. But I still think that one is probably the most cut and dry of the 4 matchups.
T1 RNG is probably the one I'm most excited about. I really hope
MSI rematch.
I really hope that RNG is feeling better. MSI rematch, but it goes back so far. Like, there's also been World's Best of Fives between T1 RNG back in the Uzi days that were wicked exciting. There was the series where Faker played Galio 5 games in a row. Do you remember that one?
Put the team on his back.
Yeah, put the team on his back. Hard carried his Galio. Uzi almost carried it. That's, to me, that's such a classic matchup. It's crazy it's happening in the quarterfinals. It makes sense because RNG was actually a 4 seed. I do think, what I said earlier in the podcast, and I've been outspoken about this, my hot take was that RNG is going to win Worlds. They're that good of a team because of their year-long performance.
I've lost faith in them for this tournament, I would say a little bit.
Just based off today, or because of play-in, or week 1?
Everything kind of combined. I think Group D was a little weak.
Yeah,
let's be honest.
It was.
And I think Gen G was struggling week 1. They had a weird draft.
Yep.
Against RNG. I think RNG's good, but they struggled against 100 Thieves, like we've said.
Yeah,
a little bit.
In both games, not just today.
Yep. So I do think that there is a little bit that might have been working in their favor. They also all had COVID today, so I could be totally wrong.
Yeah,
and they look incredible.
They make it so hard to judge because they did not look. They looked pretty sick to me. It wasn't one of those just pull the positive test, feel fine. It was no, they looked like they weren't feeling well.
They tweeted as well that Xiaohu, everyone felt like shit. They listed everyone's symptoms in the tweet, or maybe it was a translated thing. I'm not quite sure, but it wasn't, like you said, one of those times where you test positive, but you're I'm asymptomatic. It was no, we're all fucking feeling like shit. So yeah. I do think that there is some truth to that, but I also wonder how much was also just the group being a little soft, especially with Gen G not playing super well, because then Gen G beat them with the fastest tiebreaker ever at Worlds. So
this is a quickie. That was a quick game.
Yep.
I'm just going to forget about that one. Moving on.
They're sick. They're fine.
Yeah, they're fine. Everything's fine.
So T1, I think, is the favorite to me. I think they're not a perfect team, but I think the Gumayushi concerns look okay now.
Zeus is amazing as well. He's
fucking insane.
So good.
Yeah.
He's got to be their best player.
Easily. And Owner and Faker work well together for the most part. So I don't know. I feel like they're a pretty complete team with a very clear, strong suit that I guess I'm a little concerned about Breathe after I watched him struggle versus Someday.
It's COVID.
Any that was week 1. His Jax got slammed by Aatrox.
Maybe he just hadn't tested positive yet, Mark. Maybe his skill was being
His Jax got beat by Aatrox of Someday. Not to say Someday's bad either, but just Zeus's next level. And we watched him just absolutely shit on Flandra. So I don't know.
Yeah. Gen G, DK, I got to go with Gen G because it's the LCK finals. Although, weirdly enough, I feel like usually at Worlds, the lower seeded team from the region ends up winning the series. I bet you if I went back in Worlds history, that would be true.
I bet it is too, because I feel like the number 1 seed often doesn't actually win at Worlds.
Mm-hmm. Because they get team killed by their own damn region.
Yes, but also I think to your point, the meta changes, and what made them so good for that, the teams are close enough in skill level.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd say that the meta changes are enough to flip that power ranking of a second place to a first place and a first place to a second or whatever.
Yeah.
Because Damwon's top side of the map is fucking gross. Nuggery's still trolling a little bit. But Showmaker is really good.
As one does.
he's good for an int game. Can't rule him out.
Yeah.
Duck Dam and Kellen are fine. I don't know. I'm not super convinced by their bot lane. I can see a world where Ruler just runs over their faces again.
Yeah. I'm gonna check in on the team kill stat. I can't verify it now. It's too hard, but I feel like it's true. I feel like
it's true, later. But I feel like in this instance, bot lane meta, it's still kind of a bot lane meta. Maybe not as much as playoffs, but
Agreed.
Lucian, Nami, Sivir, Yumi, pick your poison. You can get smashed in bot lane.
Yeah. And then final matchup, DRX, EDG. DRX definitely with the I'd say the like quote overperformance of everyone in groups. Number 4 LCK team that was like 9-9 in the regular season now is a 1 seed going in. So I think EDG should actually be pretty happy about this poll. I think I'm favoring EDG even though Zeka and Deft have looked very good.
Yes, I am. I feel like they should kind of feel good as a second seed, but also not feel that good because DRX is much better than they clearly were last season or in the regular season. Like Pioshik was in Juhan and all the weird stuff that was going on there looks mostly cleaned up. Like I'm pretty fine with Pioshik's performance at World so far. Zek is a beast. Deft and Barrel have been very good. Kingin, I don't love. I think he's good, but he's up against Flandra, who again is good. But they often don't even try to play through him. He did slam a bunch of Fiora picks in week 2 and shit on his group a little bit until he bumped into Zeus. So, and I mean, King is not Zeus. So, like, I don't know. The top lane is relatively even to me.
I feel like Zeka's an insane Akali Silas Azir. And if they just
What happens in
a best of 5, they're just going to pinch that shit and Scout is going to smash him. That's what's going to happen.
That's the pessimistic what happens in this best of 5 angle to make it unhype, which is like Zeka, who's been incredible, gets his champs pinched.
And is just
he's taken out.
Normal human.
Yeah.
He's no longer an absolute unit. Also, one final thing, and like, I don't know when this is not going to be true, but I swear to God, probably like the last 3 years before Worlds, I'm like, I think every LCK team is really good. And then there's a bunch of doubters that are like, though, the T1's not looking that good, and like the DRX is just not the same as the other 3 teams. And then I'm just like, 25 of 26 LCK teams that have ever been in group stage have made it to quarterfinals. And sure enough, they all make it again. Like every year, all of the LCK goes through.
It is
they
very
do not
funny
miss in groups. And everyone's always a little surprised.
It's very funny to see the like evolution of like the Western public Twitterverse Reddit perception alter over the years. Because for a while it was like, there's no fucking way an LCK team is going to drop their group, up until around 2018. And then some doubt got introduced. When it happened once. And then what ended up happening was during that time period as well, LPL started winning everything.
Yeah.
And people conflated group stage performance with best of 5 success.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of course correcting now because I've seen more conversation about like LCK hasn't missed. They almost always finish first in their group.
Yep.
They also all have like a 80% win rate or something across.
It's 79.
Group
what
stage.
It was going into this. It's probably pretty much the same. Like they probably
yeah.
just kept
I feel like at this point it's like, the LCK teams are going to get first for the best of 1s. We'll see what happens in best of 5s.
Yeah.
Don't count the LPL teams out, but the LCK teams are fine in best of 1s.
What if they've just been really unlucky in best of 5s and they've just been the best forever? I don't believe this take. I just thrown it out there to be controversial. Because like their group stage performance literally hasn't changed. Like they have just been as dominant for 7 years in group stage. But the LPL obviously made a big rise, and G2 won that MSI. So that threw things into a bit of chaos. And 2018 was awful for Korea. They didn't get a team into semifinals, right? So there was definitely an actual off year to reset people's expectations.
Yeah, it was extended, kind of like we're talking about the golden age for Europe.
Yeah.
There was also a Stone Age, Dark Age for LCK internationally. But it seems like we're through that. Order has been restored.
I feel like they always lose in game 5 too. Like at all these MSIs that LPL wins, it's like the 5th game. T1 RNG, it was the 4th game when RNG won their first MSI against Kingzone Dragon X. So yeah, anyway, we're just throwing out random numbers now that aren't backed by facts. So I think it might
making stuff up. No one check anything we said this podcast, please.
Just the last few minutes.
Everything we said is right if you ignore Leaguepedia.
Yeah. Is there another topic you want to discuss, or you good to go and join?
No, I think I got out my vitriol for the most part.
Do you want to plug your stuff? Why are you in New York?
Yeah. I'm in New York still because we're doing live hotline leagues at every event still. So the day before group or quarter starts the day before semis and the day before finals, we'll be doing live hotline leagues. So if you're showing up into town for any of those and you're getting there the day before, try and get tickets. I think tickets are free and you can show up regardless of if you got a ticket or not, but it's just a guaranteed entry to make sure that you can get in if we ever do pop off.
Nice.
Just trying to make sure that there's some semblance of
So
order.
do you know when the next one is?
Yes, Wednesday night. I think it's at 7.
Yeah.
Could be 8. And it's at the Cutting Room in Midtown Manhattan.
Hell yeah. There we go. That's the plug. Good job.
There you go.
No more NA at Worlds again. But we're going to have some good best of fives. That's the important thing.
We have good quarters. We should.
Very good bracket draw. Things are looking up. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Mark's done with this. I'll see you next time.